This week I thought I'd have a look at building a new hillside, which has its challenges. So looking towards the countryside end of the layout, the viaduct and the hillside look reasonably well done. However, on this side here, I've yet to start. Obviously the hillside was here before the railway, so it's always kind of best to think about how the railway would have been built into the hillside. Hence, I've got a valley coming through here with a bit of a gorge, and I've deliberately used rocks rather than have a sort of a gentle slope down to add more interest. So how do we then instigate this into the other side? Well, my plan is to run this kind of the angle of this valley up, as you can see, as I've drawn it on this piece of polystyrene. So all this will be one large hillside, and these first two tracks that will run into the industrial side of the layout will be in a kind of a cutting, whereas behind it will be the part of the hillside, and the other two tracks here, which run to the fiddle yard, will disappear into a double mouth tunnel. And as you can see, those tracks just dropped on there, and they will then go into the fiddle yard. I need some kind of a retaining wall feature to go along here. So what I thought I would use is the Plaster of Paris molds from Woodland Scenics. And I've got some I've already made that I can sort of show you how it might look. And these are off the old Chadwick. But what I'm thinking of doing is, as these lines split, we will kind of build up the rock face until it eventually joins up with the retaining walls over here, and it will give more of a countryside feature, and then the land will go away. And then I'll make all the land form out of something called Celotex, which is a sort of a trade name for a solid foam insulating board. But as I'm going to put cork on these boards, and then the track, I think what I need to do now is rip all this lot out. Obviously I'll have to stop playing trains for a while because I'll have severed these lines, put cork down on both of these boards, and then plan out exactly where these tracks are going to go, and then build the landform around it. I'd appreciate it if you subscribe to my channel. I notice that actually only about 25% of my viewers do. And also, if you click the little bell icon, then you'll get a notification when the next video is released. Well, it's now the following day, and as you can see, yesterday evening I glued down the cork onto these two boards, and I've just roughly laid out the track which will run from the viaduct into the fiddle yard. And none of this track is going to be on the Woodland Scenics foam track bed. That will be just the two tracks that will run into the industrial side on the front of this side of the layout. And before I go any further now, I need to mark out where this track is going to go and then build up the scenery around it. And of course, getting started on scenery is always the hardest thing to do. So for the scenery, I'm using sheets of insulation foam, and in the trade it's kind of known as Celotex. And here is an offcut from a previous job that someone gave me to use, and this stuff is 4 inches thick, and there's the trade name Celotex. However, Celotex clearly isn't the only company that make this type of product, and Extratherm is another one. And here we can see an 8 foot by 4 foot sheet of Extratherm, and I've cut it into 3 sections because coming back from the builder's merchant, I clearly couldn't get it in the back of the car. And here's the smallest of those sheets. As you can see, it is much, it's half the thickness of the Celotex. And I don't know if you know this, but trains, if you like, from the base to the top of the locomotive is about 2.5 inches. So I will need 2 sheets of this to bring this up. So what I intend to do now is mark up where that track will be laid, and then simply bring up 2 layers of Celotex, or the Extratherm now, to start to make the hillside. I'm not going to glue it down, but I will glue the layers to each other. I've got a feeling whether I could make it removable. The whole hillside, I don't think I can. If I get a major issue in there that I can't reach with my hands, I can always move that cupboard and come in behind it. So that's the next move now. Mark out the track, remove the track, and then start to build the scenery. For those curves, I'm actually using set track, and the outside one is 4th radius curve and the inside is 3rd radius curve. So I will obviously make sure that the longest trains that I've got, which are the Mark III coach, the longest wagons I've got, which are Mark III coaches, so that they will pass each other before I glue those down. Just a matter of interest, I will be gluing the track down and not pinning it as usual. I may pin it down just to start with, but again, I don't want to pin it permanently because of the noise transmission through the pins into the track. So I'll mark these 2 bits of track out with a felt tip pen and get rid of this, and then take this board outside and we'll have a look at cutting up some of that Celotex. Well, we're starting to take shape now, and as we climb up that hillside, obviously the board's going to get shorter and shorter. I popped in a logo there. This isn't against the wall because obviously that's in the way, and I've also drawn in the outer track of the 2 tracks that go into the industrial unit, because obviously I need to start filling in this with a bit of Celotex to bring this up to form the rest of the hillside. I don't really need it all to be solid, but what I thought I would do is I would build the whole thing and then cut out the bits I don't need if I need access from behind. But I thought I would build it as a mass and then see if I could just move it in one piece, and if I can't, then I'll just cut it up and cut it into sections and perhaps glue it in. It might mean that I glue in the back section, but not particularly this section if I can make a join along a hedgerow of a field or something. But it's a bit messier than I thought. Polystyrene, when you cut through it, there are bits that go absolutely everywhere. And this is nowhere near as bad as polystyrene, but it is the sort of thing you want to do outside and let the wind take those tiny, tiny fragments away. If you can cut it with a knife, it's much less messy. But as you saw, I just used a wood saw to get the basic shape. So what I'll do now is I will do another 2 layers on top of here, and so we go from there. And if you just bear with me while I take this out a moment. As my Western goes on its side. And you can see I've got lots of clearance here, so it'll work out fairly well. Yeah, I'm sort of pleased with the progress, and we'll start to take this off now with another couple of sheets of Celotex. Using 2 of those larger blocks, I've made up the sides of the cliff face, and on here is where I intend to glue those Woodland Scenics rock faces, and hopefully it will give me enough clearance there. And then we need to shape the whole top. And as you can imagine, there's quite a lot of wastage with this product. Hopefully that's marked up underneath. Yes, it has. Well, here's the basic structure in shape. Looks a bit bizarre, really, but there's no other way of doing it. You can't get this in half measures. And if you can see just in the corners, you can just see the tips of where I drew that line. So where do we go from here? Well, I think what I'll do is glue, sort of 2 slabs together and then trim them down. If you're married and your wife's around, don't do it. Don't use Celotex because the patio is absolutely littered with the stuff. And fortunately it's going to be windy tomorrow, so hopefully it will blow most of it away. But it's just the dust of it. And I've also got some on the existing layout, which is no big shakes because it will just vacuum off. But yes, so I'll start to glue it together. The only thing I haven't decided is whether to tear the silver paper off. So what I might do is do those first top three, glue those together without the paper and see what the bond is like, and then try to shape them up to the initial line that I drew on that piece of polystyrene, and see how they kind of shape up. I know it's difficult to envisage, but that wall that comes along here, the retaining wall, though this may go on for a bit further, on the back of the retaining wall will go, or on top of it will go to the branch station. So there may well be a road to put in here, which is no big shakes, because if I move that cupboard I can cut in a road, and I can also insert a piece of hardboard with a back seam to go in there. So I kind of hopefully thought these things through. But you never know. You never know really, do you? Well, anyway, at the end of the day, it's just a piece of what do you call it, Celotex, and just to square things up. This was about 30 quid, which is probably what, I don't know, a biggish wagon, you know, a posh guard's van, a second-hand coach. It's all it is, and some glue. I've got various glues. I'm not too sure what I'll use at first. I think with those top three, when I glue those together, I'll try an Evo stick wood glue and see how that goes. I've also got the good old favourite Gorilla Glue, and the great advantage of this, it doesn't hang around. This glues in next to no time, which is another reason why I've decided not to use polystyrene. If you remember when I did the viaduct, I used polystyrene initially with PVA, and it was just a mess and it was never going to dry. So I wiped it all off and used a different glue, but that's when my heart was really sold on things like Celotex insulation as a modelling product. So I shall peel those three off, give them a little bit of a shaping, and we'll see how we get on. Well, now the first three levels are in. I've done away with the top one. The little bit on the top just seemed a little bit too steep to go up there, but hopefully you can see that it's starting to take shape. I'm not too sure what I'm going to cover it with. I could use a plaster cloth, or I might just go straight for Sculptor Mold, but I haven't finished trimming it. I just want to get the whole sort of shape complete. I butted the retaining wall up against theirs just so I can see how much I need to take down. So I needed to kind of come down halfway along this level of Celotex, and then need to shape this one down here. And then of course the last thing I need to do once the hill's complete is then build in the tunnel mouth, because obviously, as I said earlier about the land being there before the railway, so you need to build the tunnel mouth into the hillside rather than put a tunnel mouth in and build the hillside around it. Otherwise you sort of put in the cart before the horse sort of thing. So that's what I'll do next, is just start on this level here, bring that one down, then get the glue out, and we'll try and stick it together. I was going to try and stick the top down first, but I haven't done that. I've peeled all the silver paper off, and I'm just going to build right down and see how that gets on. So I'll be back to you shortly. Well, I think it's fair to say that there's the skeleton complete. So what I think I'll do now is glue this level and the ones above it together, and hopefully they'll go off, and then I can think about sculpting as one hill rather than in 4 different layers. I've opened up the back of that one slightly, because I actually don't need the run around there, and should I get a derailment I can get my hands in there so much easier, and these will just glue down, and then hopefully I may be able to leave that other module that I just took off as a removable item. Excuse me, but we'll see how that pans out really. Yeah, so I shall glue those together with a bit of Gorilla Glue and get back to you. Now, just to make the most of the last of the nice evenings, I'm just going to fill the gaps around here with Deep Gap Polyfiller, which is a grey stuff, but this way this will go off by the morning, and it will obviously take the depth out of the bumps, as it were, between the levels of the Celotex. Well, it's now the following day, and this filler has gone off nicely, so all I'm going to do is rub it down, and then we'll figure out what we're going to cover it with. These ruts might seem quite severe, but they'll make excellent field borders, if you like, so I can put hedging through it. So I'm quite happy that it's not such an even kind of spread, and besides that it will fit in well with the gorge aspect of the levels coming through from there. As you can see, it's an ideal thing to do in the garden rather than in the house. Now, like most people, I go to model railway shows and buy stuff that I don't really need, and I thought I would invest in some Woodland Scenics plaster cloth. I'd never tried it before, and then when I went to get some out, I realised that I had bought another two. But anyway, they'll come in handy for a change instead of me buying them. So the way you do it is one big sheet, and you cut them into squares sort of thing and put it on, and they should overlap by 50%. I've got a little what do you call it, wallpaper roller tub with water, so all I intend to do is cut them into a sort of a short length. And then you lay, in according to the instructions, you lay them down with the rough side up. So it's quite a straightforward affair. You don't hang around in the water with it. So it's just a case of popping it in and then slapping it on. So we'll see how we get on. And it dries in a hard shell. So it gives some rigidity to this little diorama. This is a messy task, so just be careful here where you do it. This isn't the sort of thing you want to do in your dining room or anything, just anything ridiculous like that. You will be in big trouble, especially if she sees what you've done to the scissors. That's not true, they're my scissors. It says a 50% overlap. I may have been a bit frugal on some of that, so I can always put some more on later on anyway. Once I get this first layer on, I'll probably go back and put another layer on. But it's certainly changing the look of it completely. Well, there's the finished item. It was quite straightforward really, but as I mentioned, it's messy. Best not do it indoors. Now, while the Woodland Scenics plaster cloth is drying off, I thought I'd lay the tracks to the fiddle yard. Model railways are all about illusion, aren't they, really? So what I didn't want to do was, as these come into the tunnel mouth, I didn't want them to turn straight away, because I wanted the illusion that the trains go into the tunnel, come from the tunnel straight. So the last thing I wanted was it to go into the tunnel and suddenly sort of take a turn, and you can actually look in the tunnel and see the coaches zinging around a corner, which is why I've deliberately left it as straight as I can, and then put some set track third and fourth radius curves kind of shape on the far end of it. So at least now I've got these to run straight. So I'm going to commit now that this board is in to stay, and track up this one, and then put those tracks in prior to me refitting the hillside. And obviously those tracks that go on will have their droppers attached to those rails. And for those who are into sort of more complex electronics, and these rails now will be on the Fiddle Yard power district. Well, the end piece is in place and I laid the track. It's not glued down, but I have in fact soldered on the droppers, and obviously I need to test it before we go any further to make sure that these Mark III Hornby coaches will go around without touching, and they do. We've got about kind of what is it, about 1/4 of an inch, about sort of 5mm clearance between the two, so we won't have any issues there, or we're all good to go. And the normal routine, I'm sure you've seen me do this dozens of times, is there's my soldering, and it's just black goes to the back, red to the front, and I solder them on the bottom of the rails. So what I do now is I'll just get some Copydex type glue and glue those two tracks, but not these end two tracks. These are just on for just to help me line it up. So I'll just glue those down. There's a little bit of an issue just here where this board drops away slightly, which is fine because I could just jack it up. But the way I want these tracks to come, I want these tracks to come down a shade as they run off into the fiddle yard. They're not, all the boards aren't exactly parallel, so all I need to do is jack this one up by 1mm there, 1/2mm there, and glue them down, and all will be fine. So I should get some glue out and crack on with that. Now with Copydex I have to decant it into a little lid, because the brush on the Copydex doesn't fit to the bottom of the container, so I have to decant it a little bit, and then all I do is I pop it onto the bottom of the rails. If you put it onto the bottom of the track bed, you're just wasting Copydex really. It seems you have more wastage, because obviously if it's just on the cork, then it's not really doing a lot of gluing. And using Copydex rather than glue, because it's a rubberized glue and not like PVA, it doesn't dry hard, so therefore the transmission of sound, because obviously all we're trying to do is avoid this dreadful rumble as our trains go by, that sound isn't transmitted through the Copydex as it would be if you were deciding to use pins. So just pop this on. I'm using insulated fish plates on both of these rails, and that's because it's a different power district. Okay, then I shall just do the next one and then line them up. So there we are, all lined up. All the fish plates are definitely in, the rails are snug. We just need to weight it down and wait for that to go off. Meanwhile, we'll start on the next one. And here I've got those two little bits of plastic card, the 2.5mm, so I'll just pop a bit of Copydex on the underside. And again on the front one. So same as before, just a quick case of lining them up and pushing them into place. Lovely. Right. Now, if you've never come across this commodity, it's known as Sculptor Mold. And it's a kind of specialist paper mache, let's say. Mixing it 2 parts Sculptor Mold to 1 part water, it should take up the consistency of cottage cheese. And when you apply it to your modelling surface, it kind of goes on, you know, you put it on with a trowel, and then after 10 minutes or so, if you wet your fingers, you can knead its kind of thing, and it becomes very, very smooth. And you can either, you know, leave it quite rough, you know, for let's say rough countryside, or very, very smooth if you wanted it to be, you know, luxury pasture land. So there we go. This is how it is now. The consistency, like I say, of cottage cheese. So all I shall do is put some on, and so you can get the general idea of how it works. Because I'm shooting onto a white on white, I've turned the lights down a little bit, so hopefully you can see the effect of the Sculptor Mold. The Woodland Scenics Plaster roll has a kind of texture of its own, and obviously the Sculptor Mold will get rid of that. One of the tricks is not to do too much at one time. I'll switch to a bigger. Seems a bit of a mess, but the magic is yet to happen. And I suppose those few cupfuls there, there was 2 cupfuls I used there, is covering about 1/4 of the board. So it gives you an idea of how much I've used. Now, using my hand, I've spread it out a little bit further. It was on a little bit too thick. So I've now gone about there. So I probably covered just under, well, no, about 1/3 of the board, I suppose, perhaps nearly half. So now we get into that stage where it's starting to go off, and if I wet my hand, hopefully you can see that the whole surface becomes very easy to, I mean, polish is probably one word for it. Well, there it is back in its place, and that's where it will remain for the next few days while it dries off. I haven't pushed it against the cupboard, and it's certainly not against the wall, hence there's that step down on the left-hand side. Once it has thoroughly dried out, it'll get a coat of paint, and then it'll look a lot more reasonable. So where do we go from here? Well, as you can see, this hillside should come up here, and what I'm going to do is just going to come over and then just dip down here, as if this hillside came down, and then the tracks that come through here to the industrial unit, there'll be a small cutting, so you can just peer over and see those trains go by. When all this has gone off, then I can cut in the tunnel mouth and finish off this piece of scenics, and also then put in the rock faces that will go along this edge here to give that kind of a nice nature kind of feel to it. Of course, this will all be green and fences and cows and grass and that kind of stuff, as you'd expect. The join between the backdrop, which isn't by any means good, obviously there will be a bit of shrubbery and a very large tree to cover that. And as I mentioned, across the back of this unit, I can stick another back scene to cover the kind of starkness of that cupboard. It's funny, when you look at that new hillside from up here, it doesn't seem very big, but when you've got it in your hands, it's almost a square metre. But I think it looks right compared to the hillside on the other side. Well, time's really running out on this video. I tried to keep them for 30 minutes, so we'll return to this hillside in a later episode when I'll show you how I finish it off, do the painting, construct the tunnel mouth, and sort of set it to work really, and of course do the rock face across the front. This should be video number 98, which excitingly next one is going to be 99, and then 100 will be the celebration, I think. So we'll have a bottle of pop there and have a bit of a sort of a light-hearted look. If there's anything you'd like me to bring up in episode number 100, a celebration of the channel, then please let me know in the comments below. Whether you know of anyone who deserves a good shout out, I will go through and name a few names of people who've actually given me stuff, not as a trial but as a complete out of the blue gift, and those people are worthy of a mention. They're worthy of some kind of reward, so that's something I'm really looking forward to doing. In the meantime, this is the stuff I used for gluing the Celotex together. The Gorilla wood glue didn't actually, it held, but nowhere near as quick as this Evo Stick polyurethane wood glue. So there's one to stick down in that Amazon tab, so we can all have a central place to go for good tools. And as I've mentioned previously, if you know of anything good, then that's where it should be. One thing I can't put in that tab is these excellent wire strippers. I can't find them anywhere else, but if you're after a pair, they're RS 382-2847, and you simply need to Google it and you'll end up at the manufacturer. They're not cheap, but they are well worth it. So please don't ask where I get them from. You just have to Google the number and it takes you to the RS website and you have to buy from them directly. So there we go. So time to wrap up. I must thank the people who donate to me, and I must thank my patrons as well. And if you'd like to become a patron or donate, their links are in the See More tab below, or click the Patreon link. Don't forget to subscribe, it's free, and videos here and here. I'll see you next week. Thanks a lot, take care, bye bye.